anyone watching the media at that time, especially in the U.S. and especially after the hostage crisis, saw Iran as, a swarm of screaming fanatics, and that the place was impossible in many ways. And yet here were these subtle, beautiful, tender, revealing, films. That, of course, calls into question, well, maybe what we're seeing on TV isn't the full story. Maybe there's another side to Iran. Maybe at the same time that there are the screaming fanatics, there are a lot of other really nice people, with whom we have a lot in common. I always use a little example. Years ago, unfortunately, the situation hasn't totally gone away, when the U.S. was having some crisis moment with Iran, and they were talking about the possibility of bombing Iran because of, the nuclear issue or things like that. And a student of mine from Columbia, who I knew we'd spoken, and I knew he was a great fan of Iranian film, said to me, I was reading about how these, they were talking about bombing, Tehran because of this, and I kept on thinking, does that mean they're going to bomb Kiarostami? And, and I remember really being very moved by that and feeling, there's something silly about it, but it's also wonderful because now this young American has a connection to an Iranian. There's an Iranian who he really cares about, whose art really moves him, whose art is important for him. And the idea that the U.S. is toying with the idea of bombing, and in that bombing might, somehow, inadvertently or whatever, kill this major artist or wound him or others like him, meant something to him. Now, that's what cinema can do. It can suddenly make you care about people who are very far away and you have nothing to do with on a personal level. Now, obviously, this was the section of Iranian culture, far more than obviously music or anything else, that was embraced by the West and whatever. So almost as payback for that, they've been systematically kind of trying to punish people who are related with it. More recently, they've been using what you might think of as more traditional methods, arresting filmmakers, threatening filmmakers, taking away their passports. In the last 10 years, there have been a number of high-profile filmmakers who have simply found it impossible to continue working in Iran. Certainly, Makhmalbaf is maybe the most famous case of someone who simply refused to keep working in Iran and has been making films in India and Turkey and other places. Gobadi now, of course, is outside of Iran and certainly won't be going back, I think, in any time in the near future. And, of course, we have the horrible cases of Jafar Panahi and Mohammad Rasulov, both of whom, are under sentence and both of whom, could be thrown into jail. Right now, Jafar is in his home in a sort of house arrest. Isn't able to go out and whatever, and is literally waiting for a knock on his door, for, I guess, the day that they decide to arrest him and throw him in jail. That's obviously very, very effective, because it scares everybody, in terms of thinking that these people have this kind of power over us. Even my good friend Katayun from Scheherazade Media, a great, film agent and film distributor, even she, who simply sells films abroad, was for a while in jail. So these obviously have been used as examples to scare a lot of other filmmakers. In a way, people like Panahi and Rasulov, they have a big international following. So everything that happens to them gets reported, we know about, it's denounced and all that. But if you're a filmmaker who doesn't have that international following, it's much scarier. I hate to say it, but people will care about you less. People care a lot about Jafar because he's made great films, he's won festivals, he's traveled all over the world, so he has a great following. If you're a filmmaker starting out and you see, boy, if they do that to Panahi, what would they do to me? That I think has a real chilling effect on people wanting to make films that in any way might be controversial. It's an easy symbol that we're doing something to really stop the decadence, but, it's obviously taking time and attention away from what I think the real problems are. These are desperate acts of a regime that's clearly losing power. The only way it keeps in power is it beats people over the head. Now, if that's how you're going to keep power, you're not going to keep power very long. There's no regime in history that's been able to maintain itself simply through force. So it's just a matter of time. And I think that these people are feeling more and more desperate. I think the economic situation, from what I read, is getting more desperate. The unemployment situation is getting more desperate. And, this kind of attack on cinema is their way of sort of feeling, oh, this is the problem, when they know the real problems are elsewhere, and much larger and much harder to solve. The House of Cinema was, for me, always a kind of central point, a focal point during my 2 visits to Iran. Aside from being welcomed there for meals or for meetings with friends and whatever, it was clearly a place where ideas were exchanged, where information was exchanged, where debate and just a sharing of knowledge, I think, was very much part of what went on there. And it's a very sad sign to see such an institution close down. At least in my experience, it was an institution that was about interaction, it was about encounter, it was about exchange. And those things, I think, are essential for filmmakers from Iran or elsewhere. So hopefully the House of Cinema will be reopened again, and I look forward someday to going back there and having another great meal.